Professor Bruce K. Alexander, a psychologist at Simon Fraser University in British Columbia, highlighted the importance of being part of a healthy community. And, as we've said, how disconnection is an element of addiction. And he highlighted this in his rat park experiment. Dr. Alexander was an experimental psychologist at a time when it was common to use white lab rats for research. And the rats lived in solitary confinement cell blocks. They were isolated and unable to see or touch each other. And they were the lucky ones. What was even worse than solitary confinement was when the rats were put into boxes and endured either 24-hour starvation, or they could get tiny pellets of food one at a time if they pushed a little lever on the side of the box over and over again. Experimental psychologists thought that these boxes, Skinner boxes as they were known, were a good place to study addiction. So they perfected a way to allow the rats to inject small doses of a drug into themselves by pressing a lever. And the drugs reached the rats' brains moments after self-administration. The researchers watched as the rats pressed the lever frequently enough to consume large amounts of morphine, heroin, cocaine and other drugs. And many of the rats preferred the drug injections to food and water. They continued pressing the drug lever until they eventually died. Now, this study appeared to corroborate the theory that drugs are extremely addictive, and the media went wild over the research. But Alexander had his doubts about these results because he knew that in normal circumstances, rats are highly social sexual creatures, and, just like humans, solitary confinement can drive them crazy. Rats, like humans, would prefer to take mind-numbing substances rather than be mind-numbingly bored, emotionally isolated and powerless. So, in 1977, Professor Alexander gathered a team of Simon Fraser University researchers to repeat the study, but with one big difference. In one part of the room, they built standard wire cages that would alienate the rats and stop them from interacting. And in another part of the room, Alexander and his colleagues built big plywood boxes, and they filled it with things that rats like: climbing platforms, tin cans to hide in, wood chips for playing in, and running wheels for exercise. And rats of both sexes were put into the box, and soon the enclosure was filled with adult rats and baby rats too. They called the enclosure Rat Park, and the team ran several experiments comparing the drug consumption of rats in Rat Park with the rats in solitary confinement. And it was no surprise that the isolated rats consumed more of the drug solution in every experiment. But for the rats in the park, morphine had no attraction, even when it was dissolved in sticky sweet liquid that they love. The social rats in the park would even go through withdrawal rather than consume the morphine. So, in a natural surrounding, a rat will stay away from the drug if it's given the choice. And Alexander reported that nothing we tried instilled a strong appetite for morphine or produced anything that looked like addiction in rats that were housed in a reasonably normal environment. Now, in contrast, isolated caged rats consumed up to 20 times more morphine. And just like we've talked about, Alexander believes that there are many human beings that don't have a healthy social or cultural life, so they use their addiction as a way of coping with their dislocation, with their lack of connection with others. And as we've said, they use it as an escape, a painkiller. They use drugs or addictive behaviour as a way to deaden the senses, and at the same time, to substitute an addicted life for a full life. Alexander asks, what if the difference between not being addicted and being addicted was the difference between seeing the world as your park and seeing the world as your cage?